Welcome, my name is Jessica. Also, we have back here Emily. We are employees of the Friends of Freedom Park, which is the nonprofit that sort of powers this facility, the Great River Road Visitor and Learning Center at Freedom Park here in Prescott. The facility and the park are owned by the city, and then we, the Friends of Freedom Park, supply staff, and we help organize some of the events, and we're very, very thankful. I need to make sure to thank the people behind us, who are sort of like the faces of this organization sometime. Thank you to Tammy, who's on our board of directors, who helped get a bunch of people here today, and also is responsible for connecting us with Tim. So Tim Clemens of Ironwood Foraging Company, I'm going to let him tell you more about himself and his business and a lot of what he does, but I want to just give you a brief rundown. He holds a Bachelor of Arts in Anthropology from the University of Minnesota Twin Cities. He's a Minnesota Master Naturalist. He's a member of the Minnesota Mycological Society and a certified wild mushroom expert. So I'm going to hand it over to Tim in just a minute, but I want to just do a couple more thank yous. Thank you to the people who make our programs possible, especially the Prescott Foundation. Right here in Prescott, Wisconsin, we get a sizable grant to bring fantastic speakers in. The Nelson Family Foundation, the Sheely Charitable Trust, and then our members and donors who make a lot of these things possible, and our volunteers as well. Thank you for that, and I'll turn it over now to Tim Clemens.
Okay, hi everybody. Thank you for coming today. So we were potentially going to have an outdoor portion today, but we aren't going to do that. The late snows pushed back the Morel season about a week or two, so we're going to stay inside today. Yes, I am the owner of Ironwood Foraging. I started that company this year. My passion is foraging plants and mushrooms and also making products out of those. So I make soap, a line of cosmetic products, as well as selling plants and mushrooms directly. So yeah, so what we're talking about today is spring mushrooms. We're blessed with a diversity of mushrooms in this area. Even Wisconsin, we actually have more mushroom diversity than the Pacific Northwest, where people will usually think is like the most diverse place in the United States for mushrooms, but nope, it's right here. We have over 10,000 different fungus. So today we're going to talk about morels. We're going to cover those and a couple other ones. So first, what are mushrooms? Mushrooms that we know and that we eat, that we find, they are the fruit of what can be thought of as like the apple to the apple tree. With the tree itself is the mycelium, which is a network of almost hairy-looking hyphae, which are tubes that transport the nutrients for mushrooms. They also dissolve, they decompose the substrate that mushrooms grow out of, whether that's wood or even granite. Mushrooms at the tips of their hyphae exude enzymes and proteins. A lot of that have not been even described by science yet, but they dissolve the world around us, and they're essentially the border between life and death and the natural environment. Mushrooms can either be mycorrhizal or saprophytic. Mycorrhizal mushrooms grow in conjunction with plants, whether that's trees or herbaceous plants. And there's two kinds of mycorrhizal. So endomycorrhizal, which is roots that the mycelium grows in the roots between the plant cells itself. And so that's like, you have a symbiotic relationship with trees where the mycelium here will grow in between roots. So this is actually decomposed, that's saprophytic, but these will grow around roots and sheathe them. And they actually benefit the plants by increasing their surface area for gathering nutrients and water. And what they get is, complex sugars, such as glucose from the tree. They also protect their host tree or their host plant against further fungal infection or bacteria. And then you have your ectomycorrhizal, your ectomycorrhizal fungus is actually the sheath, and the endo is the one that grows between cells of a living organism as a symbiote. Saprophytic mushrooms, they break down wood. They are your parasites. They kill the host, and then they decompose that substrate. And then finally, we get the fruit body of a mushroom. It has 3 parts that you can think of it generally. The cap, which is the pileus, the spore surface, which is the hymenium or hymenial surface. That's where the spores are born and are released from. And the stem or stipe. You got a beautiful yellow morel there. And then mushrooms come in 4 large types or groups. Polypores, which you'll see today. Gilled mushrooms, which you'll see today as well. Boletes, we will not cover that. There aren't any boletes in spring in this area. And other, and morels fall in other, as well as another mushroom we'll see is an other. So identification. When you're out looking for mushrooms, it's important to have the right mindset. So looking and not searching for mushrooms. So the difference between that is searching for something, you're likely to try to fit a square peg into a round hole. That leads to a lot of misidentifications, and as many of us might know, there are certain mushrooms out there that are deadly, poisonous. So what we're doing is looking, especially if you're unfamiliar with an area. So you're open to what you're seeing. You're open to, flashes of color. So if you're walking through the woods and you see white, you'll check that out. Red, browns, tans. Just open to what you're surrounded by. Also seeing what is there rather than what you want to see. A lot of people will be so excited to find morels this time of year that they'll really take any mushroom that has a cap and a stipe and say, oh, maybe this is a morel, maybe I should eat it. And then they'll go and look up morels online or in a book or from one of their friends. And yeah, it's not even close. Because mushrooms have lookalikes. You know what? This is the safest time of year to hunt mushrooms in Minnesota. There are very few lookalikes of the edible mushrooms that exist right now, but we will go over some that are very important. It's later in the year that you get the most deadly, like the destroying angel and the death cap mushrooms that could potentially be mixed up with some edible species. So this is the safest that we get, although it's not incredibly foolproof. Mushroom hunting is never foolproof. And that's why you need to build what's called negative confidence. So we'll do a little negative confidence exercise. So does anybody know what this is?
Orange.
Exactly. So we can make those jokes because we know this is bananas. If you went to the store and this was, you wanted some bananas, and instead of this you saw an orange sitting there, an apple sitting there, you would first of all, you'd know that that's supposed to be bananas, and those are not bananas. And second of all, you'd maybe even go out of your way to tell somebody else, an employee who works there, that, hey, you put these in the wrong spot. And if the employee looked at you and said, no, that's an apple, you would argue with them. You'd say, no, it's a banana. I mean, So you need to develop that kind of confidence when it comes to mushrooms. We all grew up around fruit and vegetables and the store-bought mushrooms. That's why we have that confidence. And so you need to develop that. Again, do not consume any mushrooms that you are not absolutely sure of. And then use multiple sources. I can't count the amount of times that people will use, say, like a Facebook group to identify a mushroom, and then someone will say, oh yeah, that's edible, that's this mushroom. And they're completely wrong, and it's actually like a deadly mushroom. And I actually saw one time a child actually ate a mushroom based on someone's identification, because the person just went with the first answer, and then they had an entire rest of their thread that said, like, oh no, that's poisonous, but they only saw the first answer, they signed off, they went and cooked the mushrooms, it was consumed. Luckily it wasn't deadly, it's just lots of vomiting and a bad time. So yeah, we'll just jump right into the morels. So we call morels true morels because there are false morels, and we'll get to that later. But true morels always have these characteristics. And they are, the stem and the cap are always hollow, and the cap does not have gills. Cap is totally or at least halfway connected to the stem. The cap consists of ridges and pits and is honeycomb-like. They vary in color, earthen tones, and can be found singly or in groups. They're always found on the ground because they're mycorrhizal, not saprophytic. And in Minnesota and Wisconsin, they are only found in spring. So if you find something that looks like a morel and it's not spring, it's not a morel. And the genus for true morels is Morchella when you're looking up online or in a book. And so these are your true morels. Here we have, actually we have better pictures. Here's the half-free morel, Morchella punctipes. This morel comes out about 2 weeks before the other morels. So this is the first one you're going to see. People don't usually find this, but when you do find it, it's in large quantities. I know the first time I found this, I found 70 of them, and I just stopped taking them. I mean, I could have found over 200, and I just wasn't going to eat all these mushrooms, and there's not really a market for them if anyone's interested in selling them. Nobody really buys these, so I just left them be. And
looks like it's dry, you know, the cap. But it's not, that's just its look?
Yeah, it's just its look. Yeah, for sure. And then we'll get into the connections here and how this has a look-alike, a very convincing look-alike if you're not careful. But we'll get to some very easy ways that you can distinguish between the look-alike and this. Your gray morel, this is the next one to pop up. This is the first morel people see. They just changed the name from Morchella esculenta to esculentoides. Esculentoides is the American version. Esculenta is the European version. This doesn't really concern us. It doesn't really matter for us because we're not necessarily mycologists with a microscope and writing a doctorate on this. But yeah, the yellow morel, same species. So we actually just submitted some of these for lab tests, and they are the same species as the gray morel. It's just they've been growing longer and under slightly different conditions. So there's them cut in half, and we'll get to why that's important, why you should cut your morels in half if you're not familiar with morel hunting. Then you have your Bigfoot morels, so-called. These come out later in the season. These are, they're getting towards June when you're finding these. These are the last ones you're going to find. They wrap up the season. Yeah, they can be gigantic. I think the Minnesota record, at least, or is it the Iowa record, is something like a 2-pound morel. It's crazy. It's bigger than a child. There's a picture of a child holding it, and it covers them. Huh?
How common are those to find in Minnesota or Wisconsin?
It depends based on the year, and it depends based upon where you are. I mean, for instance, this one right here was found in a backyard in Minneapolis, just in the city, and they had cut down their elm tree the year prior, and it just decided to go for broke. So, yeah, they're a little bit more crumbly than the typical morel, which is more spongy. So if you put these in your bag, they will kind of ground down to pieces, and you will be very sad when you get back to your car, and you only have debris instead of a really nice morel if you have a mesh bag. So yeah, carry these ones separately. Yeah, so when do morels come out? So this is kind of the scientific version of it, late April to early June. Also, whenever the soil temperature is at least 53 degrees at 4 inches. Some people say anywhere from 45 degrees or 60 degrees. It's been pretty well proven that it's 53 degrees in this area from Iowa to Wisconsin and Minnesota. One way you can keep track of that, if you don't want to be out creeping out your neighbors with measuring all the soil temps, the Minnesota Department of Agriculture has this website, and you can also just Google it, that exact Minnesota Department of Agriculture soil temps. They have great information for Minnesota. If you're in Wisconsin or you don't want to guess based upon latitude comparatively to Minnesota, you can go to the National Weather Service, and they have their soil temperature depth maps. If you use that website, it's kind of confusing though. So there's going to be tons of dots on the map. you got to select 4 inches because they have 2 inches, 4 inches, 8 inches, 20 inches, and 40 inches. So you just have to narrow down, and then you can see where everything's at. Mid-May is the typical peak of the season, so we are having a really late season this year. We're not even out. They're going to start popping out in mid-May, maybe in a week here. So, and the season is usually 3 to 5 weeks long. We'll see what happens with that this year. Then you have phenology. So if you don't have a temperature reading, you know, how did people do it before? We had those temperature readings. You study natural phenomena in relation to each other. So, you know, some people say it's when the lilac buds begin to bloom, or dandelions begin to seed, or oak leaves are as big as a squirrel's ear, or the first thunderstorm, because people used to think that lightning struck the ground and made the mushrooms come up. Like that was what they needed, was lightning. Probably not. I don't know, but mushrooms are confusing, so who knows? And so where do we want to look? You'll want to start on your south-facing slopes. They're warmer. They get more sun. So your season there, if you even look at the plants are going to be about a week or two ahead of the plants that are on a cooler shaded northern slope. So later in the season, you want to find the north-facing slopes that are cool. That's where you're going to find the Bigfoots as well. Pay attention to rain. Obviously, mushrooms love rain. They need moisture to grow. And yeah, recently dead or dying elms is the #1 ticket to finding morels in our region. So when I look for mushrooms, I don't look for mushrooms. I look for trees. That's the best way to avoid stomping around in the forest for hours on end, not finding anything. A lot of people will say, you know, oh, well, I was looking around in the forest for 4 hours on some day, and everyone's finding morels but me. It is true that morels can grow randomly. I mean, they can just grow along a path, and there's nothing seemingly around that gives them a reason to grow there. But that's very, very rare. What you really want is elm trees. So you have this classic upside down V, or well, this V shape, not upside down. But you have this V shape, you know, it extends like that. Usually you'll look for trees that aren't as well leafed out as this. You want them to be dying a little bit more. Sometimes you'll see bark sloughing off. That is not necessarily good because they could have pushed up their crops of morels. They only last for maybe a few years, and then they exhaust their food source there. So if it's too dead, maybe check it, but also be prepared to move on if you're not finding anything because they could have eaten all their food there. To identify other than tree shape, if you're in a forest and they're not open-grown elms, they can kind of, you know, grow very tall before they start putting out leaves, depending on the succession of that forest. So sometimes it's great to just find leaves on the ground. If you suspect an elm tree, identifying leaves is an effective way to find it. So you'll have an elliptical leaf, serrated edges, with veins attaching to the midvein, and then an uneven connection to the midvein at the bottom of the leaf. That's all elms, and we have American elm, slippery elm, and rock elm, native to Minnesota, as well as an introduced Siberian elm. They're all going to have those features. So where else? Really, most diseased deciduous hardwoods are going to have morel populations. So diseased white ash and green ash are great, especially with the ash borer happening right now. We are seeing a lot of morels under ash. And as the ash and elms are more wiped out, we'll probably still see it under cottonwoods. Under sumac, if you don't know what sumac is, just that kind of spindly shrub tree that grows those red kind of cones of small berries, furry. Tastes really sour if you ever tasted one, although don't taste things if you don't know what they are. So if you tasted it, you probably knew already. Old apple orchards are famous for having morels in them. However, there's a warning because before 1988, people were using lead arsenate as a strong herbicide on those fields. And so there's a high buildup of arsenic in that soil. As As we may know, mushrooms bioaccumulate heavy metals very readily because they can actually metabolize these compounds. They're great for bioremediation for cleaning up a site, but they're not good to eat. You would throw those out. And so, I mean, you would get very sick if you ate a substantial amount of morel mushrooms from an old apple orchard. But anything after August 1st, 1988, if those persons were law-abiding, you can totally pick there. Also, apple orchards are great because apple trees take longer to die than elms, and so they have longer morel lifespans underneath them. One place great for here is the river bottoms and floodplains. So you have the bluffs out here. Morels love disturbed ground, and in river bottoms and floodplains you have cottonwoods. So if there's a cottonwood dying in a river bottom and floodplain, you should probably go look underneath that thing. However, those things are going to be sandy, those morels. They're going to be pretty sandy typically. And if anybody's ever tried to get sand or grit out of a morel, you know, it's pretty much impossible. Unless you love your dentist, I would suggest moving to the slopes above these floodplains and hoping you can find some things there, because they will usually not have debris. Disturbed ground in general, so for instance along trails, people find, you know, in the park, people will find trails all the time, morels on trails. And along railroad tracks, I've never found morels there, but disturbed ground and usually some sort of depression makes that a likely place. Although there's a lot of chemicals there probably. I mean, you have no idea what leaked off the trains or what went into building that road through the forest. So, and then burn sites. There are some pyrophilic morels, which means they love fire essentially, and they push up readily after flames and wildfires. Out west they have a different species of morel that we call the burn morel. And that is not here. Our morels just like fire. They just like playing with fire, I guess. And the morels out there are actually different species that specifically love fire. Yeah, how to find morels. If you've ever been mushroom hunting before, just use your morel vision. It's a superpower. But really, it's just kind of not focusing so hard on what you're seeing and taking the bigger picture in a small area. So, you know those things in magazines or something that you used to look close to, and then you try to see the hidden picture? It's kind of like that, because they camouflage. But once you crouch down on your hands and knees if you have to, don't travel more ground, look more intensely at less ground. And then look in all directions. A lot of times I have been walking through an area for any type of mushroom, whether it's chanterelles, black trumpets, chicken of the woods, anything. And I'm just like, oh, I'm getting skunked today. I haven't found anything. But when I come back, because I'm done, I'm fed up, when I come back, I'm finding everything. So you just get a different angle, and apparently that's how they wanted to grow. All right, so these are the false morels. These are the things that will poison you if you get them wrong. So this is good to know. It's probably even more important to know. So the false morels include the Gyromitra, Helvella, and Verpa species. We have all these here. And so if you're a morel hunter, you may have seen these before. So this is the Gyromitra species. So people used to eat this. Actually, it's one of the type species is Gyromitra esculenta, which means edible in Latin. And people still do eat these. But we have found that due to chemical analysis, we found that they have monomethylhydrazine, which is a component of rocket fuel actually, that accumulates in your body. And so it won't kill you the first time you eat it. That's why people have eaten it. It's because it's delicious. I know for a fact, but I'm not saying you should do it either. But they are delicious, and they don't kill you right away. They don't make you sick. But eventually they will. Eventually they will kill you, because the amount of monomethylhydrazine that's in each Gyromitra is it varies depending on where it's growing. And so one day your whole life you could eat some that have very little, and then one day you could eat one that just is packed with it, and that's it for you. Like, we're just finding more and more people dying. Maybe it's because mushroom hunting was getting popular, 30, 40 years ago, and people just started diving in and digging in. But yeah, it's starting to catch up with people, so avoid these. Okay, so this is a comparison of how they look. It's kind of hard to make the leap from this to this, I would say, because this one is more of a honeycomb. It's pitted. Each pit it's surrounded by tissue, and whereas this is just like a bunch of wrinkles pushed together, and it kind of looks like a brain. However, the stem is very similar. So maybe, again, you're searching and not looking, so you're like, okay, man, I don't remember exactly what they're supposed to look like, but I remember that stem, right? And then it kind of is weird on the top. This has that stem, and it's pretty weird on the top, so maybe I'll eat that. And if you cut them in half, morels are always hollow. And then you'll have the gyromitra being completely full, chambered. So yeah, I mean, if you're not sure and you're trying to identify things, cut your morels in half. And so this is the Verpa bohemica. This is actually what I think is probably the most confusing one, because this looks like the half-free morel, doesn't it? Looks really similar. If you didn't cut it in half, you would think, oh yeah, I probably found an entire patch of half-frees. But you'll see that, so these wrinkles, they're wrinkles that are pushed together. They're not pits and ridges that are like that, you know? So they're just wrinkles pushed together. Another thing is the cap is only attached at the top. So the stipe goes all the way up. You're still not attaching. You need to be if you want to be a morel at this point. And yeah, so it's just attached to the top. Also, you have a bunch of cottony stuff in it. Sometimes that'll be very subdued. So you do have to use all of your checklist of identifying diagnostic features. You can't just cut it open and say, oh, it's hollow or pretty much hollow. This is probably good. No, you would then look at that, and the connection is at the top. So yeah, actually, let's go back to the half-free morel to show you guys that. So the half-free morel, it's also called Morchella semilibera, which just means semi-connected, semi-free. That connection right there, can anybody see that, actually? Yeah, so halfway up the cap, it is connecting there. And it's hollow completely. There's no cottony stuff. There's not even a hint of cottony material. And then the ridges, this one kind of looks confusing, but these ridges, even if they're elongated, are still, at the bottom here, they're still closed off. So it's a true pit that is surrounded by a ridge. And obviously you have your morels, these are hollow. The complete connection, right when the stipe hits the cap, it's connected, so. Then you have Verpa conica. This one's a little bit more of a stretch, but it's good to go over it because you'll find it, especially up north in conifer duff, not necessarily under hardwoods. Certain morels come up under conifers. I didn't include black morels. That's Morchella elata. Black morels, you'll hear about them up north a lot. More in the conifer forest. We do get them down here, but I just thought in the interest of brevity. So this mushroom, again, you have the connections at the top. You don't have any connection down here, and it's full of cottony substance. I actually know someone who ate these just recently because they just found them. They live in Ohio, and they were fine, so they tasted delicious. But you have to choose whether you want deliciousness or if you want to, I don't know, die. This is the helvelas. So the helvelas are getting more of a stretch here, but if you heard about black morels, or again, you kind of had this idea in your head, not fully formed idea of what a morel looked like, people have for sure mistaken this. They're beautiful, and it'd be pretty cool to find these. People used to eat these, and people still do eat these, but again, they're going to accumulate in your blood and kill you. Oh yeah, and both of these are in Minnesota. So these are a little bit more common. So these are the cross sections of the various morels. Falses on the left, true morels on the right. We see this is chambered, and they don't do a good job of showing that it's filled, but it's filled with cottony substance or actual just solid tissue. This one, it's connected at the top. Dead giveaway that it's not a true morel, and it's chambered and has cottony substance in the middle. And then this, obviously you have that connection here. The second it meets the cap, and it's hollow. Boom, bingo. And then this one is halfway. Again, that's what you want. Any questions about the morels real quick? Anybody? And we'll have questions at the end if you have any particular questions. So we'll jump into the other mushrooms that are available. There's not much diversity at this time of year, although the rest of the year kind of makes up for it. So this is the dryad saddle, Polyporus squamosus. It's a polypore, so as opposed to the morel that has ridges where its spores are created, these spores are created in these little pores and tubes that are on the underside of this mushroom. Actually, I have some examples as well. So I have a dried version. This is from last year. Found this dried on a stump 2 days ago. And I have a fresh version that I found yesterday. And the fresh version has excellent features that identify it as a choice edible at this size. When you just bring it around. If you compare those two, the pore size on the underside is the dead giveaway. So the size of a dryad saddle does not determine its choiceness concerning edibility. A lot of people say, I don't pick the big ones because they're tough. Well, it's not that it's big, it's that the pores are large. So one of those can grow very quickly in a moist and shaded environment where it has just enough water to keep growing, and it could be that big and still be very tender. The entire thing delicious. But it could grow slow, and it could be still the size of a baby. I mean, and it'll be tough the second you see it. That's my bride-to-be holding the morel and the dryad saddle. So we can go over some diagnostic features of the polypore. So the cap is pores, not gills. It's flat and shelf-like, fan or kidney-shaped. And then when they get bigger, they can kind of get a wobbly margin. And they can also turn more of a tan color. They can get huge, so they can be from that size, I mean that's brand new, to like something like that big. They're very prolific. You can find a ton. Someone here found 2 5-gallon buckets of them. Yeah, that's awesome. And you only cut off the outer margins. That's awesome to find that many.
I leave them on the tree.
Yeah, that's great.
I cut that because the outside ridge, if you get in closer in the one she's holding, it's going to be really tough.
Yeah.
But I cut the outside ridge off.
Yeah, the stem is for sure tough. It's corky. It's extremely hard. Mm-hmm.
I mean, that outside edge, that really tender edge.
Yeah.
That'll grow back.
Okay. And then the feathered appearance, the scales on the back, that gives it its other name, is the pheasant back mushroom. So if you do spore prints, to do a spore print, you take a mushroom and you put it on a white and black piece of paper, half and half each, and you put the hymeneal surface down, so the spore-bearing surface down. So on this one, it'd be like the pores on the other side down, and you wait for anywhere from a few hours to a day, depending on how old the mushroom is and the moisture content. You can cover it as well, so that you get better spore drop, but again, it's just so particular species that it doesn't really matter. Just throw it on on 2 pieces of paper. The spore print's going to be whitish to yellowish tan. And this is a saprophytic mushroom. It grows on wood. It's a white rot fungus. Smells like watermelon rind or cucumber, if anybody smelled it, if anybody was adventurous. And yeah, never consume any mushroom that you have not identified. Got to say that about each one. Another good thing about this one is if you do find the tough ones and you feel like you haven't found anything else that day, you can just either dry them yourself or dry that old tough mushroom and grind it up for stock. So makes a great soup stock. It has a nutty flavor, not quite as nutty as Morels, but it's still a delicious sautéed mushroom or mushroom stock additive. I included this as a lookalike just because if you didn't know exactly what a dryad saddle was and you saw and you heard that it had scales on it, it was a tan colored mushroom. It grew out of wood and it had a short lateral stem. You don't know exactly what short means, and maybe, I don't know, maybe that's lateral, I'm not sure. Then maybe you'd see this and you'd be like, wow, I just hit the jackpot. This is Foliota squarosa. It's also in Minnesota. It grows in the fall, as do dryad saddle. They grow from now to the fall. And so this is a potential mistake that someone could make. The big thing though is this has gills. And so if you're looking for dryad saddle and something that has gills, it's not a dryad saddle. So they did give away things like that can really help you avoid calamity. This one's just gonna, they think it might be edible, but they also think it might make you puke for a day. So I mean, and also this one has a lookalike that is Foliota squarosoides, and it is not edible, and they look exactly like. I'd be hard pressed to honestly find them. At certain growth stages, I'd be hard pressed to figure out which one is which. So I don't eat these, I don't bother. But yeah, so that's not dryad saddle. Oyster mushrooms, got some of those bad boys. This is a great spot, and you found some oyster mushrooms already. Got a jar here of dried. If you guys want to smell them and look at them and check out the gills. Oyster mushrooms are Pleurotus austriatus. They're really plentiful this time of year and all through the summer and even in fall. I mean, they're just extremely prolific. Yeah. So these pictures are better for describing this. So they're a gilled mushroom. They're saprophytic because they're growing on wood. Their gills are decurrent, which means they grow down the stem. They smell like licorice, so that's pretty cool. Usually abundant. They usually just don't grow one unless you have a different species, like an elm oyster or something. But yeah, these typically grow like this. And that was on May 21st last year. So we should be seeing them all over the place really soon.
Can I have a question? I was up in, I sort of know that one a little bit.
Oh, yeah, sure.
I was up in northern Wisconsin, and it was where some old pine needles had been, being raked, had been just left, and they were growing. Is that possible that it was that, or could I eat it because I wasn't sure?
Was there potentially any like buried wood matter?
Yeah.
Yeah, they probably were growing out of that then.
Okay.
Yeah, they can definitely do that. So you have to judge whether there's wood underneath that it's growing. That can be always very confusing too. And that's why it's good to identify based on all the characteristics rather than say one or two. Yeah, so they can be really big, fairly small. These are fairly small, they're fairly new, but they can be 10 inches across. They're smooth and no warts or scales on the cap. That's very important. They can also vary in color from white, cream, tan, light gray. And there also are yellow ones escaping from cultivation right now. So golden oysters, they're great, they're edible, but they also are escaping into our forests. So they're yellow. There's also pink ones that are bright pink. They kind of come in every color of the rainbow. They usually lack a stem, although in this picture, most of them have stems. So again, you gotta develop that mental image of what they can and can't look like. Stems typically off center. These ones are pretty centered. Most importantly though, there's no ring around the stem. There's no bulbous base or sac around the base. And if you did a spore print with these, it's lilac or pale, and they can grow on standing snags or stumps or fallen logs, typically aspen. And so while you don't want to pick any mushroom that is just white and has gills and potentially is growing by wood, is because you can get something like this, is an Amanita. The Amanita family of mushrooms is responsible for most of the mushroom poisonings in the United States and most of the mushroom deaths. This one's a California species, but we don't have it here. This is Amanita pallida. But it serves the point of looking exactly like our destroying angel or death cap. They look very similar with their volval ring and bulbous base. And those mushrooms will kill you. They have killed whole families that have made a meal and eaten the meal. It was actually in Minnesota in my lifetime that a family of 9 Hmong immigrants, they were out mushroom hunting. They found some mushrooms that looked like something that was back home. They were confident enough in their mushroom hunting skills because they've been doing it all their life. They made a soup out of this mushroom. Turns out it was the destroying angel, and it killed 8 of them outright. And then 1 little boy survived, but he didn't live long as well because of what the mushroom does to your body. It essentially destroys your liver and kidneys, and then eventually your brain, lungs, and heart. And you get sick right away. You start vomiting. If you've eaten a mushroom in the Amanita genus, you start vomiting. And you might get flu symptoms, and then you might feel like you're getting better, and you feel fine. And then your symptoms come back, and that means the toxin's been working on you that entire time you felt fine. And there's no way to save you at that point. It would be like a full liver transplant, dialysis the rest of your life, if you survived. So it's very important to identify these correctly. Yeah, so especially white mushrooms like this, I avoid them. The cost benefit is just not there for me, and the risk. That's why I make sure to get all these diagnostic features that it's growing on wood, and its gills are decurrent. These gills, they just run to the stem and not down. So, yeah. All right, and then this one's a little bit more friendly, very much more user-friendly. It's the Scarlet Elf Cup. Got a freshly harvested specimen today for you. Yeah, this one's really easy to find, especially when it's still not very green. You can see this flash of red in the woods very easily if you're out walking. So this is not a polypore, it's not a gilled mushroom, it's not a bolete. It's in the other category along with morels. This is a cup fungus. It doesn't have a distinct cap, just kind of, as you can see, it just looks like a cup. It does have a stem. On the back of the stick, you can kind of see the stem of one of them. They grow on wood, so they're saprophytes. Usually fall in branches. They don't really colonize standing trees or large logs, although sometimes they'll look like they're growing from the ground, but that's just because there's wood underneath them. They have a red interior, which is the hymeneal surface. So if you're doing a spore print of this mushroom, just to make sure, although it's really hard to mistake it, but anybody can mistake anything, honestly, Facebook. I have nightmares about these groups sometimes. But yeah, if you want to do a spore print, it's useful to know what the hymeneal surface on this one is. So it's not the bottom of the mushroom, it's the red part. So you actually turn it upside down, and then that would give you the spore print. Yeah, it likes our hardwood forests. It would totally be around here because you seem to have a lot of cottonwoods. They're thin and rubbery. And actually, the edibility of the species is like contested, but it's only contested because people didn't enjoy it because it's thin and rubbery. It's not very palatable, but although some people, they love the taste. So it's really how much of a diehard mushroomer you are. Yeah, you just saute these up with butter as well, or grind them up for a soup. Yeah, so I would say this is like the closest possible look-alike you could have in Minnesota. This is Amanita muscaria. So it's an Amanita, but this is one of them that won't really kill you. This was actually used by shamans anywhere in the northern hemisphere. Shamans were using this since time immemorial. It's actually where Santa's reindeer came from, because they were tripping out with their reindeer. And they thought the reindeer were flying. It's very interesting how they consume this too. So that the reindeer would eat it. They would eat the mushrooms because they love these mushrooms. Animals eat these all the time. Foxes, you'll find them going crazy over these. But the reindeer eat them, and then it goes through the reindeer, and you collect the urine of the reindeer.
Oh,
And then you, with that nice frothy beverage, you then, then you trip really hard apparently. And then you invent Santa.
Are they growing around here?
Yeah, so these do grow around here. These are a later season though, so you typically won't see them, but honestly, you will find some mushrooms, when they have a will, they have a way. And so like they will sometimes grow completely out of when they're supposed to grow. Typically ours are yellow around here though. Yeah, but they have those patches. I mean, honestly, I think the picture I have shows something that's a little bit confusingly like patches, but I think that's just grit and dirt. So, and also it's a cup shape, and the stem is not that.
Yeah.
So, and there's no gills. So you should be fine. All right, so the biggest concern as a mushroom hunter, other than like falling down and hurting yourself, or a branch thwapping you in the face, is deer ticks. And the deer ticks are getting worse every year. We're finding new diseases. I mean, it's not often that we find new diseases, but when it comes to ticks, it's pretty common. So Minnesota actually leads the nation, and actually the continent, in Powassan virus, which is like, makes your spinal cord and brainstem swell up. So it's not something you want, but it's actually on the rise, and it's becoming more and more common. They think something like 1 to 4% of the population can just be carriers, and like, so 1 to 4% of us could have it. It's just not doing anything to us right now. It's very poorly understood, along with many of the other deer tick illnesses. There's a lot of myths surrounding deer ticks, like how to pull them off. A lot of people try to suffocate them, or like putting nail polish if you have a deer tick on you. Nail polish or some other substance, peanut butter, I don't know, gum in your hair or deer ticks on you. It's supposed to work. But this will cause the tick to vomit into you. And that's when the disease really gets into you. If you want to assure that you're going to get potentially a disease, if this tick has one, do one of those myths where you put nail polish or rubbing alcohol or something on it. What you really want to do is you want to take a sharp tweezers and get it right behind its mouth and very, very slowly and gently pull it out so that you don't rip off the mouth. Because the mouth is still in there, you're still going to get whatever it has potentially. A lot of these present days or weeks after you're bitten with a rash. So it's always great to do a thorough deer tick check or have someone help you. That's like your entire body, especially in hair margins or moist, dark places. You definitely want to check those, number one. And yeah, then be on the lookout for anything you might have missed in terms of like rash. If you have a circular bullseye rash, or that's for Lyme disease, but these other ones, they present differently. So if you have any kind of rash or any kind of flu symptoms, even up to weeks after getting this bite, you could be sick. You should probably go to the doctor and get checked. And then specifically mention that you think you might have a tick-borne illness. So to avoid that, you, when you're walking through the woods, tuck your pants into your socks. That helps. Wear long sleeves. Some people duct tape all that. I think that's a little too much, but you can do that if you want. Also permethrin. Is everybody familiar with permethrin? This is what you put on your clothes. You can soak your clothing in it or just have a spray like this. You basically can pass that around. You set your clothes out, whatever you want to go mushroom hunting in, and then you spray that. Follow directions, of course. You can buy either the ready-made spray or you can buy a solution that's much cheaper. It's probably like 13 cents for an application, whereas like spraying your clothes with that could be 15 bucks, or sending your clothes into like a professional company that treats them with permethrin can be like $50 or $60 or more, depending upon what you want to send into them. But it's good for 50 washes after you treat it. Keep your pets away in small children because it's a nerve toxin to them as well, but once it dries, it's fine. It's actually made from flowers. It's made from chrysanthemums. So it's natural, but so are some mushrooms, so natural doesn't always mean safe. Let's see, what else do we got? Yeah, do we, some other things you want to bring. A compass to find your way out if you get lost. Sometimes you go down one valley looking for mushrooms and leaving, you're coming out 3, and you're wondering, where the heck am I? Even on forays with the Minnesota Mycological Society, we've left people behind. Like, they've been out there for 4 hours and nobody can find them. Cell phones die just when you need them most. So no one's ever been overnight, but I mean, in like a state park, I mean, being out there for 4 hours is pretty intense. So people do get lost and need to go around in circles. So bring a compass. A GPS is good, but again, those cut out potentially, could run out of batteries. Bring a knife. You always want to cut mushrooms. Don't want to pull them up. Cut them from stumps or cut them from the ground. It also helps not getting grit into your basket. If you get grit in your basket, especially with morels, again, that's how dentists make their living probably this season. No one wants to eat a gritty morel or sand. And then also if grit gets in like a gilled mushroom like oysters or something like that, it's going to be very difficult to get it out, especially because you're going to want to wash them and you shouldn't wash mushrooms. They absorb more water and then it's harder to cook. Also, a lot of people like to bring a walking stick. We don't have a huge problem with snakes around here, but down south where they do have poisonous snakes, you're going to find snakes hiding under logs or rocks. And I prefer not to get bitten by a bull snake. I mean, they're not venomous, but I like to keep it kosher, so I'll carry a stick and just kind of look around with that. A whistle's good. If you're not doing the buddy system, and even if you are, a whistle helps to just get found by anybody. I'm pretty sure most people, even if they're not looking for you, they hear a whistle repeatedly in the woods. You probably know someone needs help, and it'll help rescuers if you're really out in the boonies. Yeah.
Water?
Water would be nice, yeah. Water and a snack, yeah. For sure, I agree. Toilet paper maybe?
Amen.
Amen, yeah.
You know what, last year I started using for my walking stick,
Yeah,
is you know what a sigh is?
yeah.
Or whack and weed.
Mhm.
And because of the latter part of the season, it's got that foot on it, and I just moved the leaves to the side, and I found 50% of my mushrooms under them.
Oh yeah, that's awesome.
And you move it side to side,
Mhm.
and then on the way back, I can chop the weeds off the fence liner, so I tell my wife I do it.
Yeah, there you go. I got chores done. Scoot the mushrooms out of the scene. Yeah, mushrooms like being in dark, moist places, and so underneath foliage, they're going to be hiding there a lot. Yeah, it's a great idea to bring a stick.
And you said you shouldn't wash them?
Yeah, if you wash them in water, a lot of mushrooms love to soak up water, and it can just mess up your cooking times. If you're putting them in something like a quiche, or that extra water content could throw off your recipe, because they absorb a substantial amount of water. I mean, that's why they grow when it rains. It's because they just balloon up with water.
There's no worry about bugs or worms or anything in any of them?
Yeah, I mean, so the most common animals to eat mushrooms other than us are slugs and other bugs. I mean, it's just more protein. That's how I like to look at it. Yeah, but yeah, you're gonna want to at least scan your mushrooms, whatever mushrooms you get, and not only bugs, but just make sure that the area is kind of reasonable, like nobody was spraying anything, or if you don't know the history of the land you're on, if it was like a, I don't know, nuclear waste site or something like that, or a medical waste site or what have you, you don't want to be picking mushrooms from there either. Coach?
Is there like a mushroom hunter's code of ethics? I know different groups like wild edible hunters kind of certain guidelines that they work with.
You know what? I think the seasons of the ethic seasons would be different between Morel season and then the rest. So Morels are very sought after, and people guard their spots religiously. It's not uncommon to hear of fist fights in the woods because people are, it's like, you're on my spot. No, I'm not. It's not your spot. This is mine. They've never seen each other before, but maybe they've both been harvesting there for years. They just miss each other. And then, yeah, it comes to blows. But yeah, you can harvest mushrooms as much as you want. They are the fruit of the mycelium, so as long as you're not just disturbing the ground underneath or the substrate like the log that they're coming out of, they will grow until the food source has been absorbed there. So.
And where can you legally harvest? I mean, private land is obviously a no-no.
Private land is obviously a no-no unless you get the owner's permission. That's why it's nice to make friends in the mushroom community. Certain state parks are A-OK in Minnesota. As far as Wisconsin, I'm not sure, but probably. National parks typically do allow it as well. Mushrooms and fruit and nuts are typically allowed.
In Wisconsin, I think it's personal use only.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Well, Minnesota's personal use only. You
Yep.
can't sell it.
Right.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's not for commercial sale, just for personal use. But certain parks that you think maybe are part of a state park or something, or will allow you, it's completely illegal. I know there's a Three Rivers Park District in Dakota County and Carver County. Everything's illegal there. So fruit, nuts, everything's off limits. And always, I mean, no, this isn't mushrooms, but plants are always off limits as well.
No ramps even in the state parks?
No ramps even in the state parks. Yeah, people do get cited for poaching by conservation officers for that. And the ticket is minimum $125.
Eek.
Yeah, and that's not including what they value your haul at. So depending on that, it could be a lot more. And the worst part is they just make you dump out your basket right there, and then they stomp on them. They make you stomp on them. So I've never done that, but I've heard some people from the society have done that. And it's sad.
What was that? I didn't hear that right. No ramps?
Oh, yeah, ramps are wild leeks. They're out right now.
Oh,
And
okay. That's
yeah.
another plant.
It's a leafy plant, it's like an onion.
So can you go over the city again? You said, at first I thought you said it's okay in parks, and then I heard you say it's not okay in parks.
Yeah, it's a kind of ambiguity of the situation. You do have to call and contact whichever officials are in charge of said park that you want to go on, because it can change.
Okay.
Because like Three Rivers Park District, illegal. State parks, good for personal use. Private land, off limits to you unless you have permission. And then you can sell off of private land. And then wilderness areas, scientific and natural areas, those are always off limits for everything as well. At least in Minnesota, but I'm sure Wisconsin as well. Any other questions? Yeah.
When you are hunting mushrooms and you come across an area that has a lot of morels, is there a chance that there's other mushrooms that are inedible that are also growing in that same area?
Mm-hmm.
Or is it?
Any of the lookalikes that I went over today, the gyromitras or the verpas or the helvelas, they can be growing interspersed. So you do have to be sure of every mushroom you pick. You'll get good enough that you'll, be able to like just eyeball the morels in a patch or the half-freeze even, just knowing the basic diagnostic features. But yeah, they can grow intertwined. Yeah.
Is there like a little laminated hand guide or something that you carry with in the woods that you recommend?
Books. I'd say a book I recommend is the National Audubon Society's Guide to North American Fungus. Oh, he's got his copy right there. Yeah, so it has great pictures. Actually, the author, Gary Linkoff, passed away last month. A huge loss to the mycology community. But yeah, so you can find this pretty much at any state park, pretty cheap at Barnes & Noble. I would try to find it used though. At Barnes & Noble it's probably like $25, but you can find it used for $5. I mean, people have so many copies of these things, so it has fantastic color photos. And then it'll give you a number to where you can go back here and look up all the nitty-gritty actual identifying features. There's a lot of other great books. I guess I'm a product. Yeah, for sure. Oh, absolutely. I'm more technology based, so I will go online more. It allows me to get more opinions than just one book. I can bounce it off several different websites. One fantastic website that I'm always going to is mushroomexpert.com. Michael Kuo, he's a savage basically. He's great. So you should check it. Yeah.
Yeah, I have a question. We're all hunting for years. I don't know much about the plant, but that's gonna be fun. I've heard two rumors. The thing they say you can pick everything you see, or you should do some for stock. What's the right answer?
So you can pick. So there have been some longitudinal studies on land where they haven't picked any mushrooms, and then in that same forest they have picked all the mushrooms, not even just the edible species, but everything that comes up. And they found that over at least 30 years that the study is, I think it's still going, they found no discernible difference in the amount of harvest compared to the one that you just let go. Essentially, every breath you take, you're breathing in spores in a small amount. There's spores everywhere. One single mushroom releases hundreds of millions of spores, and so it just really needs one to get through. And also, there's a spore bank, kind of like a seed bank, in the wind and on surfaces and in soils that we really have no effect on mushrooms as far as their propagation. Especially prolific is this rumor that you should harvest mushrooms and then put them in a net bag for the spores to get out. Really all that'll do is chew up your mushrooms, or it'll snag too on things. What I use is a basket, and that's what most intense mushroom hunters use, or a 5-gallon bucket. These are great. They won't get snagged on anything. They'll protect your mushrooms. You should probably, depending on the mushroom, not layer them too much because they can crush the ones below. And also mushrooms need air, so they need to breathe in a way. And if you don't let them breathe, they can get slimy. Yeah, exactly. They can turn to slime. There are certain ones that will literally turn to slime, like ink, if you put them in plastic. Oh yeah, don't put them in plastic bags. I see that all the time as well. You know where, on Facebook, people will have like an entire grocery bag, plastic grocery bag full of mushrooms, and they'll be like, what happened to my mushrooms? I just harvested these, and then when I got home, they are mush. It's because that mushrooms breathe, they release moisture, and then it became like a little humidor in there, and then they just went to mush. So you bring a basket, big basket like that. If you're gonna go somewhere that you're not supposed to, don't do that. Don't bring a basket. Bring it like a backpack or something, I guess. Not judging anybody.
Brown paper bags seem to be.
Brown paper bags are fantastic. Yeah, they're a little bit less durable, but if you don't think you're gonna go through scrub too much or like get caught on too many thorns, yeah, brown paper bag is ideal, especially for storing them at home in the fridge. Yeah.
Is that how you recommend to store them then? You get a bunch of them.
Yeah, I store them in the fridge for sure. They have varying shelf lives. Morels I would dry. So you can dry or refrigerate them. It depends on how you want to use them. Morels, if you dry them, their flavor gets a little bit more intense, that nutty flavor, and then they reconstitute very well. So a pound of Morels fresh will go down to about 2 ounces dried. It's also a great way to store them because they get a lot smaller and durable.
Do you dehydrate them like that?
Yeah,
dehydrate them, and then you add water back to them and pop up.
You soak them for about 15 minutes or longer, and yeah, they'll just pop right back up.
Oh, no.
Okay.
Then I put mine in water and I let them set for half an hour. Then I cook them or put them whatever, and then I save the water back, and I can get a month if I can it back in the refrigerator.
Oh yeah.
Use the water for a stock.
Oh yeah, I've heard people doing that too. I'm told it's the spores and the cap on the Morel that have all the flavor. So it makes sense that the water that you did that in would have a lot of spores in it, and you get a lot of good flavor.
Past that, eating them in order to dehydrate them.
Yeah, you know.
These guys found out about them.
Oh yeah, no kidding.
Yeah, I used to take off work and go when they're at school.
Yeah, some mushrooms will. The dryad saddle will do pretty well in the fridge. Chicken of the woods, if you guys are familiar with that, that's a fall mushroom. It doesn't do well. Some mushrooms just have to be eaten right away. Oyster mushrooms, they are in the fridge really well, probably a week, but they degrade in flavor. Really the best thing about wild mushrooms and picking them yourself is being able to have them at that moment of freshness that nobody else can buy. only the mushroom hunter is able to enjoy that moment, and you can't buy it really.
Are there ones that you think that don't dry? Because most can be dried, but there are some that don't dry so well.
Yeah. The ones we talked about today are all A-OK for that, but like a chicken of the woods or something like that is not. Yeah, it's not great for drying. For drying?
Yeah.
Oh, really? Like for stock?
You have to slice them pretty thin.
Okay. Yeah. I know a lot of people say they're like chalky, and there's a lot of information out there. Yeah, all of them pretty much dry pretty well.
There's this big mushroom, yeah, it grows this big.
Oh, the giant puffball?
Yeah, and you can slice it.
Yeah, those are all over the place.
All over the place.
Yeah, if you peel those, you got to peel those. But they're always safe as long as it's like that big and it doesn't have the outline of a mushroom in it, and it's white inside, all the way through. Because if it's even a little bit yellow or heaven forbid green or brown, like if you ate that, you get pretty sick. Yeah, but giant puffballs are a great edible. You can make like you can use them as like toast, or put them in spaghetti and pastas. Yeah. Anywhere you use eggplant, you can kind of use those. Yeah. You can make like mushroom grilled cheeses. Yeah. It's like any number of things. Yeah. Any other questions?
Just out of curiosity, you had mentioned that a lot of the wildlife eat the poisonous mushrooms. My dog goes crazy for mushrooms she finds in the yard. I mean, are they immune to?
They're not. And then it's also yes and no. I would not trust your dog to necessarily know what mushrooms it can and can't eat. So I would not let your dog eat any mushrooms in your yard.
I do my best, but honestly, it's a terrier and she does what she wants.
Oh yeah, for sure. I can only imagine. Yeah, so if you have pets, don't let them eat your mushrooms, I guess, is the safest bet. But yeah, foxes will eat mushrooms that, I don't know, maybe they have different digestion. Who knows? I'd like to see the research on that. Any other questions? Looks like we're good. Okay.